Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Always exciting to dive into a new topic.
Yeah, and this one is something a lot of you have probably seen headlines about recently.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
This whole idea of pressure to conform in medicine and science. We're seeing it everywhere, it seems like.
Yeah, you see it play out online, folks getting in trouble for saying the wrong thing or
Right.
going against the grain.
Exactly. And we wanted to kind of dig into a specific take on this whole thing. And we're looking at Dr. Marty Makary's book today.
Great book.
It is, and specifically chapter 11.
Oh, yeah.
Which is called Conform or Else.
Just that title alone.
I know.
It's intense.
But it's a little scary, honestly. Like, when you think about it,
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, is there really that much pressure in these fields to just go along with the crowd?
To just follow the herd.
Yeah, even when it comes to, research,
Especially with research.
Yeah, what happens to the people who don't? What happens to the people who are like, wait a second, I don't know about that?
Yeah. You know what's so interesting is Dr. Makary, he doesn't just, theorize about this pressure.
Right.
He actually gives a really personal example, right at the beginning of the chapter.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about this CME form that he was asked to sign.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Before giving a lecture at Johns Hopkins.
Johns Hopkins, of all places.
Yeah.
You would think open discourse central, right?
You would think.
Like the home of...
If you're allowed to say whatever you want as long as you have the research to back it up.
Exactly.
But this form basically was asking him to pledge allegiance to accepted medical evidence.
Which sounds harmless enough at first glance.
At first glance, you're like, well, yeah, of course.
Right.
But when you really think about what that means...
Well, I guess kind of iffy.
It's like, who decides what's accepted?
Right, who's the ultimate authority here?
And what happens to the people who have maybe different interpretations of the evidence?
Or maybe they have different evidence.
Right, or they're looking at things from a different angle.
Different perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah, that part really made me stop and think, because it's like, okay, so if you're at this prestigious institution and you're being asked to sign something like that before you can even share your research.
Right.
What does that say to other doctors, who might be out there who have different viewpoints?
Yeah. It almost makes them hesitant to even speak up.
Right, exactly. If they're making someone at Johns Hopkins sign this, what are they going to make me do?
Exactly. And that's where the real concern comes in, right?
Yeah.
Does this stifle actual scientific debate?
Does it make people afraid to challenge the norm?
Yeah.
And Dr. Makary, he doesn't think this is just an isolated incident.
Right.
He sees this as a systemic issue, right?
Oh, yeah. It's woven into the very fabric of medicine, he argues. And he points to three main areas where this pressure really manifests. Grant funding.
Okay.
Medical journals. And even medical societies themselves.
Those are the three pillars almost.
They're like the gatekeepers in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Of what is considered acceptable medical knowledge and practice.
So let's unpack those a bit.
Okay, let's do it.
When you think about grant funding, how much influence does a small group of people have over what research actually gets done?
Oh, it's huge. It's enormous.
It's got to be a ton, right?
Because think about it. The National Institutes of Health, the NIH.
Right.
They distribute billions of dollars in research grants every year.
It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
That's driving a lot of research.
And the people who are deciding which projects get that funding are often senior scientists.
Right.
Who've built their entire careers on certain ideas.
They have a lot invested in their ideas.
They've got skin in the game.
Right, literally.
So you can imagine how tough it might be for a young researcher who has a really innovative idea that might challenge the existing dogma.
Right. Or even just a different way of looking at it.
To get their proposal through that system.
Yeah, because it's they're going up against this establishment.
Against the tide.
Yeah, and it's not just about egos and reputations either, right?
Oh,
it's about resources too.
Resources funding.
If you're a young researcher and you need funding to do your work,
right,
you're going to be more likely to propose research that you think will actually get funded.
Exactly.
So it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It does.
The research that gets funded tends to reinforce what's already considered accepted knowledge.
And it just keeps perpetuating the cycle.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how many potentially groundbreaking discoveries are being missed because they just don't fit neatly into the existing paradigms.
Oh, they're too radical, or they challenge the status quo too much.
Yeah, they just don't make it through that filter.
And who knows what we're missing out on because of that.
That's a good point.
It's a scary thought, right?
It is. It's actually scary to think about, like, what are we not learning about?
What could we be doing better?
Exactly.
What cures are out there that we just haven't even thought of yet because we're so stuck in our ways?
And then there's the whole world of medical journals, which we rely on so much, right?
Of course.
Like to stay informed about new research, new treatments.
Absolutely. It's like our bread and butter.
But Dr. Makary raises some serious concerns about their role as gatekeepers.
As the filters of information.
Yeah, because they have the power to decide what actually gets disseminated to the medical community and ultimately to patients.
To the public.
To the public, right? So who are these people making these decisions?
Well, it's usually editorial boards.
Okay.
Made up of experts in their fields.
Experts. So that sounds good on the surface.
Sounds good. But what if those experts have certain biases?
Right? Everyone has biases.
Everyone has biases, certain leanings, professional rivalries even.
Oh, yeah. You hear stories
Oh, yeah.
about those kinds of things.
That happens.
So does that influence what they choose to publish or reject?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, are they truly objective?
Or is there an agenda?
Or are they trying to push a certain narrative?
That's a good question.
And, this isn't just about, like, theoretical bias.
Right.
Dr. Makary, he gives some pretty concrete examples of how journals have actually been weaponized.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was this whole controversy with the New England Journal of Medicine, the NEJM.
That's like the top dog, right?
Yeah, one of the most prestigious journals in the world.
So what happened?
They published this unprecedented political endorsement.
Oh, wow.
In the 2020 election.
I don't remember hearing about that.
It was a big deal.
So they actually, endorsed a candidate.
They didn't name a specific candidate, but they basically laid out a set of criteria.
I see.
And it was pretty clear who they were alluding to.
Wow. That's a pretty bold move for a medical journal.
It was a huge departure from their traditional nonpartisan stance.
Yeah. I mean, you think of a medical journal, it's supposed to be about science and evidence.
Right.
Not politics.
Exactly. And a lot of people felt like they had crossed a line.
Yeah, I can see why that would be controversial.
It raised a lot of questions about their objectivity and their role in shaping public opinion.
Right, because if a journal like that takes a political stance, it lends a certain credibility to it. Well, if the NEJM is saying this, it must be true.
Yeah, people trust these institutions.
And that's a lot of power.
A lot of power.
So it makes you think how much of what we consider medical truth is actually shaped by these editorial decisions.
Right, are we getting the full picture?
And how often are dissenting viewpoints, even well-researched ones, being excluded from the conversation?
Are we only hearing one side of the story?
Yeah, it's like we're talking about science here, right?
It should be about open inquiry.
About challenging the status quo.
Debate.
But if we're only hearing one side of the story,
right,
how can we have an honest debate?
And how can we trust the conclusions that are being drawn?
That's a good point.
It undermines the whole scientific process.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's the patients who suffer.
Right, because we're making decisions about our health based on this information.
Exactly. And if that information is incomplete or biased,
it could have real consequences.
Serious consequences.
So it's not just an academic debate.
This is real life.
It's about people's lives.
Absolutely.
And then there's the role of medical societies.
Yes.
Which I think for a lot of people is even more surprising.
Yeah, you don't think of them as the bad guys.
Right. You think of them as champions for physicians and patients.
Right. Promoting best practices, advocating for better care.
But when I read about medical associations actually trying to silence dissenting voices,
actively working to shut down debate.
Yeah, it really surprised me.
It is a surprising shift.
Like, when did that happen?
When did it become okay to punish doctors for expressing different viewpoints?
Even if those viewpoints are backed by evidence.
Exactly.
Like, expressing a different perspective is now seen as a threat.
Like you're a heretic.
Yeah.
You're going against the dogma.
It's like we're not allowed to question anything anymore.
Which is the antithesis of science.
Right. Science is all about questioning.
It's about challenging assumptions.
Testing hypotheses.
Being open to new evidence.
But if we're not allowed to do that,
right,
what happens to progress?
It stagnates.
It dies.
We end up stuck in our ways.
Yeah, and we miss out on potentially life-saving discoveries.
And better treatments for patients.
And that's what it all comes down to, right?
At the end of the day,
it's about patient care.
It's about helping people.
And if we're silencing the voices of those who are trying to do that, then we're all losing out.
We're all worse off.
Exactly.
And, this isn't just theoretical.
Right.
Dr. Makary, he gives some pretty specific examples of how this pressure to conform has led to some pretty disturbing cases of flawed research.
Like real-world examples.
Real-world examples that actually made it through the peer review process.
Oh, wow. So this isn't just like sloppy science.
No.
This is like deliberate manipulation.
In some cases, yeah.
And got published.
It got published in major medical journals.
That's scary.
It is scary.
Because if that can happen, what else is out there?
Right. How much of the medical research that we're relying on is actually built on shaky foundations?
It makes you wonder if the system is really working the way it should.
It does make you question the whole system.
And it makes you think, if these cases were caught, how many others are out there?
Quietly influencing medical practice.
Impacting patient outcomes.
And we just don't even know about it.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
And it really undermines trust in the whole system.
It does.
It's like if we can't trust the research that's being published.
Then what can we trust?
Exactly.
It's a fundamental problem.
And it brings us to another case study that Dr. Makary highlights.
Oh, yeah?
The controversy surrounding Tamiflu.
Tamiflu.
Which I think is a really interesting example because it shows what can happen when we rely on summaries or interpretations of data.
Right.
Instead of looking at the raw information ourselves.
The actual patient-level data.
So remind us what happened with Tamiflu.
So governments around the world spent billions.
Billions with a B.
Billions with a B, stockpiling Tamiflu.
Wow.
Based on studies that claimed it could significantly reduce complications from influenza.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
You want to be prepared for a pandemic.
Absolutely.
But it turns out these studies were based on summaries of the data, not the actual patient-level data.
So like someone else's interpretation of the data.
Exactly. Like they took the raw data, they did their analysis,
Okay.
and then they just presented their conclusions.
Got it.
Without showing anyone the actual data itself.
So kind of like a game of telephone?
A little bit, yeah.
Like things could get lost in translation?
Or misrepresented or misinterpreted.
And that's where Dr. Tom Jefferson comes in, right?
Yes, he's a scientist with the Cochrane collaboration.
Which is known for doing like really rigorous independent reviews of medical evidence.
Yeah, they're like the gold standard.
So they're not messing around.
They're all about the data.
And he fought hard to get access to the raw data from those Tamiflu trials.
He wanted to see the receipts.
And what did he find?
What he found was pretty shocking.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat.
The drug wasn't nearly as effective as the initial studies suggested.
Oh, wow. So those summaries were misleading.
They were very misleading.
So they made it sound like Tamiflu was this wonder drug.
It was touted as a game changer.
And it wasn't.
It barely made a difference in reducing influenza complications.
Oh, wow. That's a huge discrepancy.
Huge. And get this, even some of the co-authors of the original study
No way.
hadn't seen the full patient-level data.
So they were just trusting the summaries.
They were trusting the people who had done the analysis.
And those people weren't being entirely honest.
Let's just say there were some discrepancies.
That's wild. It is wild. So decisions with huge public health implications.
Billions of dollars spent
Right.
stockpiling this drug.
Were being made based on incomplete and potentially misleading information.
And that's the danger of not having access to the raw data,
Yeah, because you're relying on someone else's interpretation.
which could be
It
biased.
could be inaccurate,
It could be deliberately misleading
and you wouldn't even know.
unless you have access to the original data.
That's a good point.
So it raises a really crucial question.
Okay, what is it?
What if patient-level data from all clinical trials were routinely made public? Would that change the landscape of medical research?
I mean, it would definitely increase transparency
It would.
and accountability,
Absolutely.
but it also brings up some ethical considerations, right?
Of course.
Like patient privacy, data security.
It's a complex issue
It is.
with no easy answers.
But it's a conversation we need to have.
Absolutely. We need to figure out how to balance those competing interests.
Yeah, because ultimately it's about finding the best way to advance medical knowledge.
And improve patient care.
And that's what really matters.
That's the bottom line. Welcome back.
I feel like we've gone pretty deep already.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
That's important stuff.
It is, and it can be a bit heavy.
Yeah, I'm feeling that sense of like, whoa, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of things to be concerned about.
Yeah, definitely.
But you know, one thing I appreciate about Dr. Makary's book is that he doesn't just leave us in a place of despair.
No.
He actually offers like a path forward.
Yeah.
A way to kind of reclaim that spirit of open inquiry and make medicine more intellectually honest.
A way to move forward.
Yeah, and a big part of that seems to be fostering this culture of open discourse, right?
Oh, and absolutely.
He talks about how vital that is, especially in fields like science and medicine.
Where the stakes are so high.
Yeah, exactly. Like people's lives are literally on the line.
And I was particularly struck by the Royal Society motto he mentioned.
Oh, yeah, nullius in verba.
Which means take nobody's word for it.
It's so powerful.
That's like the opposite of conform or else.
Right, it's like the antidote.
It really is.
And it speaks to that fundamental principle of science, that knowledge is constantly evolving, that we should always be questioning, testing, refining our understanding.
And the Royal Society, with its long history of embracing diverse perspectives, encouraging debate, that's a great example of what that looks like in practice.
It makes you think, what happens when we do just take someone's word for it?
Yeah. What happens when we don't question, when we don't debate?
I think we risk stagnation.
We do. We create an environment where people are afraid to challenge the status quo.
Right. To propose new ideas.
To point out potential flaws.
Yeah, and that can have a chilling effect on innovation and progress, especially in a field like medicine.
Especially in medicine, where things are constantly changing.
It makes me think of those classic scientific discoveries,
Yeah.
The ones that completely overturned existing paradigms.
Right.
Like Copernicus challenging the geocentric model of the universe.
Or Darwin proposing the theory of evolution.
Those ideas were met with huge resistance at the time.
Oh, yeah. People were not happy.
But they ultimately revolutionized our understanding of the world.
They changed everything.
And those breakthroughs wouldn't have happened if those scientists hadn't dared to challenge the prevailing dogma.
They had to have the courage to go against the grain.
They were willing to ask those difficult questions.
To present evidence that contradicted accepted beliefs.
And to face the backlash.
Because there's always backlash.
There is, and it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Especially when you're going up against powerful institutions.
Or established ways of thinking.
And I think that's what's so inspiring about Dr. Makary's own journey.
Oh, yeah, he's been a bit of a nonconformist throughout his career.
He's not afraid to rock the boat.
He's taken on some pretty controversial topics.
He's shown a light on what he calls blind spots in the medical field.
Yeah, and one of the first blind spots he tackled was the issue of medical institutions profiting from investments in tobacco companies.
Oh, wow, that's a big one.
Even while advocating against smoking.
So they were talking out of both sides of their mouths.
It's pretty hypocritical, right?
Yeah. And as a medical student, he co-authored a paper calling for divestment from tobacco stocks.
That's pretty bold for a medical student.
It was a bold move, and it was met with resistance at first.
I can imagine.
But it ultimately led to widespread change within the medical community.
So it shows that even one person,
even a student,
can make a difference.
If they're willing to speak up.
What other blind spots did he focus on?
As a resident, he became deeply concerned about the prevalence of preventable medical errors.
Ah, it's a huge issue.
It is. And he'd witnessed firsthand the devastating impact these errors could have on patients.
Yeah, it's not just statistics.
It's real people's lives.
And he was determined to do something about it.
But when he shared his interest in studying this issue, he was told it wasn't a real science.
Oh, wow.
And that he wouldn't be able to get funding for that kind of research.
So not exactly an encouraging response.
But it sounds like he didn't let that stop him.
He didn't. He persisted.
He conducted research, he published papers, and ultimately developed practical solutions.
Like what?
Like the surgical checklist.
Oh, yeah, that's famous.
Which has been adopted worldwide and is credited with saving countless lives.
It's amazing how something so simple
could have such a huge impact.
It's a testament to his dedication and his persistence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And his willingness to challenge the status quo.
What other blind spots did Dr. Makary address?
Well, he was also a vocal advocate for greater transparency in hospital pricing.
Oh, yeah, that's a black box for sure.
He exposed the common practice of hospitals suing patients who couldn't afford their medical bills.
That's awful.
It is, and he pushed for clearer, more upfront pricing practices.
So people would know what they were getting into.
Exactly. And his efforts, along with those of many others, eventually led to legislation requiring hospitals to make their prices public.
So he's not just pointing out problems.
He's actually working to find solutions.
He's creating positive change within the system.
He's a doer.
And while a lot of his work has focused on these systemic issues within the medical field, he also emphasizes the importance of individual choices and behaviors.
When it comes to health and well-being.
Right. He talks about moving beyond a purely reactive, disease-focused approach to healthcare and embracing a more holistic view.
One that considers lifestyle factors, social determinants of health.
the power of preventative measures.
It's not just about treating disease.
It's about preventing it in the first place.
Exactly. And he asked some thought-provoking questions like, can we treat diabetes more effectively with cooking classes than by just prescribing insulin?
Interesting.
Can we lower blood pressure by addressing stress and sleep quality?
Rather than just relying on medication.
Can we even address the epidemic of loneliness by fostering community connections?
Instead of just prescribing antidepressants.
It's about looking at the whole person.
And addressing the root causes of illness.
Rather than just treating the symptom.
That's a really powerful question.
They challenge the way we typically think about healthcare.
They suggest a much broader, more integrated approach.
One that addresses the whole person, not just their disease.
And it's not just about rejecting conventional treatments.
No.
He's also excited about the potential of new technologies and advancements.
Like personalized medicine.
Gene editing.
Artificial intelligence.
All that cool stuff.
But he cautions against embracing these advancements blindly.
Right.
Without carefully considering their ethical implications.
It's potential risks.
It's a reminder that technology is a tool.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
We need to be thoughtful about how we integrate these powerful new technologies into healthcare.
And ensure they're used responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely.
Speaking of thoughtful integration,
Yeah.
one of the most exciting things Dr. Makary highlights is this emerging generation of healthcare professionals
Oh, yeah.
who are challenging the status quo.
They're pushing boundaries.
And really pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
They're not afraid to disrupt the system.
Yeah, they're not bound by the old ways of thinking.
They're exploring alternative treatments for chronic diseases, focusing on preventative measures.
Addressing health disparities.
Even starting companies that are disrupting the healthcare delivery system itself.
It's like they're bringing a fresh perspective.
A new energy to the field.
And that's encouraging, isn't it?
It is.
To see this new generation tackling these complex challenges with such creativity and commitment.
Gives you hope for the future.
It does. You know, when we were talking earlier about the need for open discourse, one of the things that really stuck with me was Dr. Makary's point about Renaissance thinkers.
Oh, yeah. What'd you make of that?
I thought it was a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
He's basically arguing for a return to a more holistic, interdisciplinary approach to medicine.
One that draws on a wider range of knowledge and skills.
He uses the example of Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, yeah.
Who wasn't just a brilliant scientist and inventor.
Right, he's a polymath.
He was also a writer, a diplomat, a political leader.
A true Renaissance man.
He saw connections between seemingly disparate fields.
And was able to apply his knowledge in a variety of domains.
It makes you wonder, do we need more of those Renaissance thinkers in medicine today?
People who can bridge the gaps between specialties.
Who can think critically across disciplines?
Who can see the bigger picture when it comes to health and well-being.
I think so, especially in a world that's become increasingly specialized and siloed.
We need people who can connect the dots, who can see the interconnectedness of things.
And who can approach problems with fresh perspectives.
It makes me think about how many of the health challenges we face today, things like chronic diseases, mental health issues, substance abuse.
They're so complex and multifaceted.
They don't fit neatly into one specialty or discipline.
They require a more integrated, collaborative approach.
And that requires a different kind of doctor.
One who's not just a technician.
But a true healer.
Someone who understands the whole person.
Who considers the social, environmental, psychological factors that contribute to health.
And who's able to integrate different approaches and perspectives.
To create a truly personalized plan for each patient.
It's a high bar.
It is.
But it's an inspiring vision.
It is. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I'm curious to explore how we can all cultivate that spirit of inquiry, that willingness to challenge assumptions and seek out diverse perspectives.
Not just in medicine, but in our own lives.
In all aspects of our lives.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Dr. Makary's book, I'm left with this mix of emotions.
Oh, yeah. I get it.
On one hand, there's this sense of urgency, you know?
Like we need to do something.
Like we got to address these issues head on.
Yeah. The pressure to conform, the silencing of dissent, the bias.
All of it.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, there's also this sense of hope.
I feel that too.
Like Dr. Makary doesn't just lay out the problems.
Right.
He actually offers a vision for a better future.
Yeah. More intellectually honest approach.
More courageous.
Yeah.
And he reminds us that this isn't just about doctors and scientists.
Right.
It's about all of us.
We all have a role to play.
We all have a responsibility to foster open discourse,
to challenge assumptions.
Seek out diverse perspectives.
It's about being engaged citizens.
And that can be tough, right?
It is.
It's so easy to just surround yourself with people who agree with you.
Stay in your echo chamber.
Yeah, but if we really want to learn and grow,
we need to get out of our comfort zones.
Talk to people who see things differently.
Even if it makes us uncomfortable.
And it's not just about listening to different perspectives.
Right.
It's about engaging with them thoughtfully.
Respectfully.
Even if we disagree.
Yeah. Dr. Makary talks about the importance of civil discourse.
Having those difficult conversations.
Without resorting to personal attacks.
Without trying to shut down the other person.
Right. Like, we could disagree.
But we can still be respectful.
We can still listen.
We can still learn from each other.
And remember, we're all on the same team.
Even if we have different ideas about how to get there.
We all want what's best.
We're all trying to understand the world better.
Find solutions to complex problems.
Create a healthier, more just society.
That's the goal.
And that shared goal is so important to remember.
Especially in a world that can feel so polarized.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the us versus them mentality.
But Dr. Makary reminds us that the pursuit of truth,
the quest for knowledge,
it's a collective endeavor.
We need each other
to move forward.
Thinking back to that idea of Renaissance thinkers.
Yeah.
It's not just about having a broad range of knowledge.
It's about making connections.
Seeing patterns that others might miss.
Fostering that intellectual curiosity.
That sense of wonder.
About learning new things.
Exploring different ideas.
And being willing to step outside of our silos.
Our comfort zone.
And see the world with fresh eyes.
And that's something we can all do.
No matter what our background is.
Our beliefs,
our profession.
It's about asking questions,
challenging assumptions,
engaging with the world in a thoughtful, curious, and open-minded way.
That's how we grow.
That's how we make progress.
That's how we create a better future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder.
Ooh, I like that.
What blind spots are you noticing?
In your own field, in your own life.
What assumptions are you taking for granted?
What voices are being silenced?
And how can you amplify them?
Because ultimately, the future of medicine, the future of science, the future of our society.
It depends on our collective courage to question, to challenge, and to imagine a better world.
That's what this is all about.
Thanks for joining us.